Okay, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce a legend in the space industry who's sitting here with us today. So, Dan Goldin, the longest serving administrator of NASA, who served from April 1992 to November 2001. Dan is credited with the reemergence of NASA through one of its most challenging times after the Cold War. Under his leadership, the agency's bloated bureaucracy and inefficiency was challenged. His tenure was marked by faster, better, cheaper, an approach that laid the groundwork for what the space industry is today. He embarked on a number of groundbreaking missions, including the deployment of the Mars Pathfinder, extensive work on the Hubble Space Telescope, and played a pivotal role in redesigning and constructing the International Space Station. We could spend a long time, probably an hour, just talking about all of Dan's accomplishments, but I'm actually going to talk about one of my favorites. Under his administration, NASA developed the X-43A hypersonic plane that earned the Guinness World Record for the fastest air-breathing aircraft at Mach 9.6 in 2004, a record which still stands today and has a lot of implications for national security. So Dan, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Now, it's not every day I get a chance to sit next to someone like yourself and ask the right questions. So there's one thing that I think everyone's really dying to know, which is, how much do you love Payload?
Oh, I love it so much.
So you've done a lot for civilian space, but I want to talk a little bit about your time at TRW, because I know we generally don't get to talk about that a lot. And you did a lot of work on military and intelligence programs at TRW. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Very little. I'll talk about what I can talk about. And let me bring one program that comes to mind because it'll relate to things I want to say later. And that is in 1983, I was asked to build the payload for Millstar. What is Millstar? Millstar is designed to live through a nuclear holocaust. I'll say that again. It's designed to live through a nuclear holocaust because this is a very dangerous world, and assure that there'd be a command and control signal that would come through. I worked in partnership with Sam Araki at Lockheed, and there are 5 of them up there now. The first one is 25 years old. They're still working, and the command and control signal could get through. I could talk about that. I worked with Dr. Edward Teller at the Lawrence Livermore National Labs under Star Wars, and I developed Brilliant Eyes and Brilliant Pebbles. Brilliant Eyes is the basis for Cibberslow, and Brilliant Pebbles is the basis for the kinetic kill vehicles. And again, I'm going to use pretty harsh terms because defense is a pretty tough place to be. So you don't just take pretty pictures, you do other things in defense. And I'm proud that Brilliant Pebbles ended up being part of the present system to take out ballistic missiles. One more thing, of things I could talk about. I was responsible for the land-based ballistic missiles, the Minuteman program, overseeing that whole thing.
So why don't we start with, I want to talk about Sputnik. So during Sputnik, or when the Sputnik satellite was launched, which I believe was in 1957, it created a lot of paranoia in the U.S., right? Because there was this technological gap that was not perceived before it, mostly because a lot of media, at least U.S. media at the time, was talking about how big of a technological, how dominant we are versus the Soviets. Do you see anything like that could happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Any type of gaps that we don't perceive but are in reality occurring by our adversaries?
We are in terrible shape. The new space community celebrates among themselves, but they don't see the big picture. I've been in meetings with the president of Russia. I've been in meetings with the president of China. As NASA administrator, if I gave a talk, maybe 100 people would show up. After my tenure at NASA, I went to China, and they filled up giant holes. People sat in the aisle, they sat on the stage. The Chinese told me what they were going to do some years ago, and they're executing. Let me give you an example. I just wrote an article in the AIAA journal. I don't remember the name of it. It's called You'll Never Know Unless You Go. And basically, I criticized the National Academy of Sciences that recommended that NASA build a Webb Space Telescope replacement. And by the way, I did the conceptual design on the Webb Space Telescope. The replacement is going to cost $11 billion and take 25 years, and that's, somewhere in the 40s. In the early 30s, the Chinese are going to launch an interferometer that'll do a better job. I spoke to one of my prior colleagues at NASA. She went to a conference, a space conference, somewheres in Finland and Norway, somewheres in that region. The Chinese absolutely dominated the discussion. So yes, we have a new space industry, and it really hasn't had an impact. And there are things I don't want to talk about, but the fact of the matter is, it feels just like Sputnik all over again, as Yogi Berra used to say.
So the Space Act 1958 that effectively mandated that there's technology transfer between NASA and the DoD. Right? Do you think that that's being done effectively today?
Well, where is American hypersonics? We're nowhere compared to the Chinese and the Russians. NASA built the X-15, which flew, I think, 200 times over 10 years. It was supersonic at Mach 5. NASA built the wind tunnels. For some reason, there wasn't a connectivity between NASA and the DoD. For some reason, the DoD was sitting on its hands. Shameful, shameful. Hypersonics presents a tremendous threat to America, and now we have to catch up when we were in the lead. I could go through area after area. I'll give you another one. I'm interested in ceramic matrix composites. I went to the web. I could hardly find any American papers on it. I found a lot of Chinese, and guess what? That's the future. Graphite reinforced epoxy is dead. The Chinese are leading. We are not in a good place, and it's very, very uncomfortable. And I know I'm coming off like someone who wants war. I don't want war. I want America to get its act together. You don't earn the respect of the rest of the world if you're not leading. And I'll also go on to say, right now, the way we are having our space exploration, I'll give you one more fact. The Chinese have a space exploration program defined through 2100. Let that sink in, 2100. We don't even know what's going to happen beyond the next Artemis landing. They are thinking about the routes in space. They're going to the different Lagrangian points between the planets. They're looking at asteroids. Goldman Sachs said the first trillionaire on this planet is going to be the trillionaire that mines the asteroids. I don't have a lot of time to talk to it, but go to the web and read what's on the asteroids. So while we're fantasizing that we're going to get lots of stuff from the moon, maybe we'll get water, maybe we'll get hydrogen, oxygen, but why the hell do I go to the moon to go to Mars? Because I got to fall into the gravitational well and I got to come out of the gravitational well. The Chinese are teamed with the Russians on a lunar base. They said 2030. We said 2024. What's happening this year?
So
I'm not easy to get along with.
no, no. Well, Well, we can talk about NASA delays all day long, but I want to talk about.
Could I talk about what else I've been doing besides TRW?
Yeah, of course.
And I'm going
I
to.
was actually just going to get to that, but please.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll wait.
Well,
I'm impatient too.
well, one of the things I wanted to talk about is Cerberus. So you are involved with a major private equity firm in New York that's doing a lot of work in national security. So you do have an investor hat that you wear on occasion, and you look at a lot of startups.
My investor hat is on 24/7.
Okay, there you go.
And I've probably looked at a few hundred startups.
Okay, so
But let me tell you the good news from Cerberus. The reason I decided, and I'm not an employee there, I advised Steve Feinberg, the founder and CEO of the company. Steve had a vision, and he said, we don't have a hypersonics test program in America where you could have reusable vehicles that take the space and bring it back so it's affordable. And he asked me to take a look at this company called Straddle Launch. And I had spent many years at NASA working on hypersonics. And we did that whole X-43A, I think, for $300 million. We didn't take $3 billion to do it because I don't like to spend government money. So I worked with them, and God bless the team. On Saturday, we had our first successful launch powered, and it was powered by another startup I'm working with, Ursa Major. Brilliant young company. So it was a demonstration that there's a capacity in this country to do different things. It's historic because we have something now that the Chinese don't have. And this is going to be an amazing platform for America. I'll give you a few more. I have about many. When I went to Cerberus, I said, I don't want to be responsible for anything. My objective in life is I've had the most amazing mentors. Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Simon Ramo. They took time with me early in my career to help me. My mission is not necessarily to make Cerberus rich. I want to help young people. And I started a website so I could communicate directly with them. That's what's important. So Steve prevailed on me. He said, Dan, could you do one company? So I became the chairman of a company called Revolution Space. I grabbed Darren Garber, just a brilliant leader, deeply steeped in the Department of Defense, and he is going to build a revolutionary, truly revolutionary space company. And just one more. There's another company that I watch over, and that's Untether AI. Untether AI is the future of inference. And they are coming out with stuff that, forgive me, they're much better than Brand X at inference. So I try and find the companies that are going to provide value. But the thing I like about Steve and Cerberus is you need to have two requirements. A, you got to make money. And B, you got to be able to show it relates to U.S. national security. He's a real patriot.
So obviously there's a whole new space movement. You're alluding to it. And you've obviously talked about a number of companies that you feel are doing things very well. What are common misunderstandings or missteps that you're seeing from startups in the space industry today?
With regards to defense,
Yeah.
okay, they don't understand the sources of money. And the DIU is fabulous. Doug Beck was one of the top executives at Apple, and he came back to government so he could lead DIU. So when people come in and I do due diligence, I'm not a comfortable person to do due diligence for. It's not pleasant. But the first thing I look for is their revenue projections and see if they have even an understanding of the difference between the available money in R&D and where the programs of record are. And now let me give you some statistics. And I deeply believe in this, and the Department of Defense isn't ready to address it. 50% of the defense spending goes to programs 50 years or older. Let that sink in as you start your new company and expect to get a program of record. 50% of that goes to companies that are traceability to 75 years old. So now, let's do a financial analysis. The budget for DIU was hundreds of millions. It's going to go to $1 billion. What's the budget of the DoD? $893 billion.
I was just about to say that.
You really think that there's a chance for an exploding, emerging new space industry? This is a serious problem. And until the Department of Defense recognizes they got to change, and this is why I'm calling this a Sputnik moment. America changed in every regard once Sputnik got launched in October '57. Education changed, finance changed. America recognized that there was a threat that was going to destroy our country. America's la 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 going along. I'm a little old. I'm older than a rock. I'm 83 years old. I work 60 hours a week and I travel the world. I'm on a mission because I'm concerned about my country. And no one is willing to take this on, and we'll never get the systems that we need without doing that.
Do you think?
I'm just going to be a festering zit in the back.
No. This is great. This is great. The current crop of company. You're a physics guy. Do most of these companies understand physics?
No. It's unbelievable. Albedo does. No. I'm familiar with Albedo. We chose not to invest in them, but they understand physics. I've looked at about 5 different VLEO companies, and I asked the following question. What do you know about coronal mass ejections? And what do you believe coronal mass ejections are going to do to your orbitology? It's like I'm on planet Mars and they're on planet Venus. It is absolutely stunning. And then others come in and just fundamental physics of how the systems work. I take a look at communication systems. I could run the equations and I could show them they're not getting the gain they're supposed to get. One of the things that it's really missing is they're with hardware companies, they're very focused on doing a demo. With the kind of tools we have, modeling and simulation is so easy. And then you use some of the AI tools with modeling and simulation, and you could prove conclusively you know where you are. And then what you say is, okay, I laid the whole thing out. I understand it. I need money to do this test to validate that, this test to validate that, that test to validate that. I mean, sometimes I want to cry when I see these companies come through.
What parts of the market do you think are? I mean, you've looked at a lot of companies. Like, what's a business that if someone said, "Hey, take a look at this," you'd be like, "No, there's too many of them."
Launch vehicles and multispectral, not multispectral, hyperspectral.
Hyperspectral.
Hyperspectral sensing. there are dozens of these companies, and they can't distinguish themselves, and they look at the epsilon difference between where they are and what they're doing. I really liked the CEO of Firefly because he's providing value added. But still, I made a challenge some years ago about the price reduction I was expecting, and we're not there yet. And the technology is available to get the price down, very important. But there are other things that have to be done. And I'm not even associated with this company, although I love Andy Lapsa. He's an amazing, amazing young man. He's got something different.
This is the CEO of Stoke Space.
Stoke Space. He's got a second stage that comes back. Now you think about defense. He's got something to offer the nation. But if someone, I just got another proposal last Friday from a company, and I didn't know why they wanted to waste my time. I'm sorry.
I want to ask what the company was.
I know you won't get it.
Yeah. So, well, why don't we actually flip the question and let me ask you, if you were advising or starting a new company today, where do you think the opportunity is?
Autonomy. But here's the issue in autonomy. Companies that take a look at autonomy and say, I'm going to press a button and I'm going to make this constellation of satellites work, or I'm going to get the data back from this, or I'm going to do launch. Or let me take one as an example, Starlink. They almost had their satellites collide, which would be disastrous. And they did all the right things, but it was so automated. So what I believe is there needs to be a partnership between the human and the machine. And the human needs to be on top of the loop, and the machine needs to do the functions that are the fast functions that are beyond the capacity of a human. But the human also has to monitor the machine, because the machine does stupid things. You know, when you start using these large language models, they get hallucinations. We don't have it all under control. And I went to a conference. It was run by DIU. It was called Disruptors in the Desert. And there was a lot of discussion, but never once did they mention the word human being. So it is ridiculous to think that I'm going to build a system. And the other part that's completely lacking in autonomous systems is, where in the world are human factors? Because now I'm marrying a human with a machine, and the human's going to start hallucinating. And why do I know all this? NASA Ames has one of the finest human factors organizations in the nation. And I don't know whether they'll talk to people that are interested in this subject, but you might want to try talking to them. It's a wonderful place. So that's one of the areas. I think there's huge amounts of money to be mined. I mean, you go into a Department of Defense Operations Center, and you're going to see 1,000 people. What you want in the limit is just a few people, and this partnership between humans and machines, where human factors are used, and the human has the right split of job breakup with the machine. And I'll give you one. I'm working on a problem right now. I also do technology. I'm working with a brilliant woman named Radhika Ventrakaman. I got it right. And Bruce Holmes. She's absolutely brilliant. She's one of the foremost experts in large language models and AI. And then Bruce Holmes, he used to work with me at NASA, and we are going to try and fix the air traffic management system. Here, there's all these new companies bringing in these advanced UAVs and eVTOLs, and they're going into an analog system where you got to talk to a human being. It's unbelievable. And if you take a look at the increase in potential collisions, in the last 10 years, it's gone up 25%. And then I say, well, the FAA was formed in 1935, and they have been doing the same thing since then with tens of thousands of people. And McDonald's was formed in 1950, and they had 10,000 planes in the sky at any one time. Now they have a 500 million. McDonald's now has 1 billion hamburgers they sell a day. And guess how they sell it? Digitally. Now think about what would happen if we used human-machine interaction for a digital air traffic management. It's not space, but it's aerospace.
I want to take a quick step out for a second. When we chatted last week about what we were going to talk about, you mentioned how energy was something that was very, very top of mind for you. And I know this is not a discussion about energy. Payload just launched a sister brand called Ignition, focused on nuclear energy, which I know you have very strong thoughts about. But tell me a little bit about why defense is not just about space. It's not just about
But
weapons.
national security
National security
is not just about weapons. National security means we have the capacity to be in control of our environment. And we are bleeding money every time people go to the gas pump. On the other hand, we don't have the most efficient use of power. Our electric grid in America is subject to EMP. Does everyone know what EMP is? All it takes is one balloon over the center of America with a nuclear weapon, and there's no power in America, and there's no semiconductors, and in 6 weeks, everybody dies. I could do this in a satellite overhead. America needs a new power grid. The future of the power grid is thermonuclear power, not fission, because fission is a disaster, because you have to move things around, at least for commercial, for the public. I'll come back to nuclear for space in a minute. So I'm now working with a couple of companies that I believe either one has the possibility of providing commercial thermonuclear power at about 400, 500 megawatts at competitive prices. And they don't put out any pollutants. They don't have any radioactive material. And they provide energy at very low rates. And now I could start sprinkling them across the country, and I could build an export industry. And all of a sudden, America is now leading the world. It's essential to our national security that we have a capacity to generate our own energy. The grid is dead, it's dying. And when that grid gets built, it damn well better be capable of handling EMP.
What do you think of directed energy weapons?
Love them. I'm Dr. Strangelove. When I ran the Space and Technology Group at TRW, we developed a chemical laser as part of the Star Wars program. I'm really proud because we generated a whole bunch of energy. And before the Cold War ended, President Bush sent some Russian generals and some scientists to see it, and he told them we were allowed to show it to them, so we pulled the curtain down. The blood drained from their face. That's the America I know, not the one that has a jobs program in defense. I know I'm going to get bombarded by some people, but what the hell, I'm 83. But what is happening is there's been a revolution in directed energy. And what people are doing now is they're using these laser diodes and fibers. So now I could get a linear magnification by putting a bundle of fibers, and if I put 500 fibers together, I could get like 500 megawatts. Not bad. But the only problem, again, with directed energy, I can't go into details, but you got to know the lethality. And I don't believe America has a valid lethality program, because I got to know how much energy I want to put on target before I could start doing destruction. And we used to do that with the chemical laser. And we also worked on electric lasers, but the diodes then were like about 10% efficiency. They're up to 70% efficient. So now if I want to build a directed energy weapon, it's much more effective against a hypersonic vehicle, which is going fast as hell. And by the way, there's also microwave. There's issues with, fog and dust and other things with those. But now, what about directed energy in space? I'd love to see, and we were supposed to do that. In fact, that's what I worked on with Edward Teller. We were going to put a very high-powered laser into space, but the Cold War ended and the whole thing died. But we need to talk about these things, and you don't see it in the media. It's ugly, but if we don't do it, we're not going to have a nation. And it's going to be the startup companies, it's going to be private equity and venture capital, because the Defense Department needs a partner. It's not an adversary. We need to work with the Defense Department. It's important.
So I want to talk about NASA a bit more. So let's take a look at the Artemis program, right? The Artemis program, we had our first launch.
You're getting into dangerous. I ran NASA, and I won't say anything negative in public against.
Well, I'm certainly not asking about. I'm not certainly asking. What I want to get your thoughts on is, we were supposed to have the second launch of Artemis this year, and not to many people's surprises, that mission's gotten delayed. Artemis is interesting though, right? Because we have the SLS rocket, which we've been working on for quite some time, and then we have SpaceX building HLS, their human landing system, to land on the moon. You have two kind of like...
And then Blue Origin's building one also.
And Blue Origin, Blue Moon, exactly. I want to be careful how I ask this, because I also know what you can and can't say, but are there any improvements that you would make to the Artemis program today that would enable us to hit our expected target dates of mission?
No comment.
Okay, there you go.
No, I just don't feel it's appropriate. Having run NASA for 10 years, it's not appropriate for me to say anything. And it's not that it would be negative, but the present administrator has a plan and a policy, and there's just no way that it's appropriate for me. I don't have all the information, so I won't comment on it.
Okay, so then let me ask one last question. Then I do want to turn it over to the audience and give them a chance to ask a few things. If there was one question that you wish people asked you more about, related to space or defense or just technology in general, what would you wish people asked you that you feel like you could provide a really, really good answer or insight into?
Why does it take so long and cost so much? Now, let me give you the basis for this. One of my idols is Kelly Johnson. He ran the Skunk Works. In 1958, the CIA came to the CIA came to Kelly Johnson and said, "We're worried the U-2 could get shot down. It's slow, and it doesn't have a very low radar cross-section. We want you to build a plane that goes unbelievable speed so the missiles can't catch it, and we don't want it to be seen." So he took the contract to build the SR-71. Now, there was no AI, there was no digital modeling, There was no computers. It was all done by hand. They used to have women, and by the way, I started working in 1962. We had the computers at NASA. They had calculating machines, and they'd run calculations for us until we got IBM 360 computers. So it's really bad.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Looking at cislunar space, you talked about it a little bit. Do you have more thoughts on what's going on in that region? And you're all about pointing out the problems, so maybe you start with some of the challenges or the vulnerabilities from the US.
Well, here's the problem. We have, and the problem goes back to 1967 when there was an agreement among 180 nations on the planet, and that is no planetary body would be owned by anybody else, and that space would be used for peaceful purposes. So now, how does the nation proceed at the moon under those conditions legally? The mission clearly has to be done by NASA. But if NASA is going to do it, we need to have some strategic plan and some policy. Now, back some years ago, NASA decided to land on the south pole of the moon. If you wanted to pick a place that's really difficult, pick that and then say, I want to do it in 2024. The light comes in tangentially, for God's sakes. How do you see? The senses get blinded. So it's a really tough problem. So America needs to have, and maybe it does, but I haven't seen it. I haven't seen indications of it. An integrated exploration military approach for how legally the military could be where it is, but to make sure NASA does the things that are essential. The other thing that's essential here is the thing that saved America in World War II and the Cold War was working with our allies. We don't have an integrated program with our allies that thinks through how we get the resources from every country, get the best of every country. We do wonderful things in different areas with different countries, but it's very hard. I know when I took over NASA, I made it my point to travel to every part in the country. That I was in 45 countries. And it's amazing when you get on a plane and you go and talk to people and you let them know you care, they start spending their resources too. And then you do really great things. So it's a question of strategy, not execution in my mind.
Anything else? When do you think we're going to land back on the moon?
I'd like to see us get there by 2026. If we got there 2026 successfully, I'll be a happy man.
What's the risk that someone gets there before us?
I don't think so.
No. Hello?
I don't think so.
Do you think, sorry for the rapid fire, but
No, go ahead. I'm good.
do you think that we are underestimating China's capabilities or overestimating?
I'm not. I like to run scared. If you run scared and have a respect for those that are challenging you, you do much better. If you ignore it, you're foolish.
And then last question, when do you think we'll land on Mars?
Oh, God help America. I started my first job at NASA Lewis, which was the official name of the place, until I flew John Glenn in space at 78. And then they changed the name to NASA Glenn. When I was there, I went to NASA Lewis because they were working on a Mars mission. I thought that Mars mission was going to get there by 1980. I believe if America put its mind to it, we know enough about Mars, we know enough about rockets. We don't know enough, we don't know enough about biology. I want to make another appeal. You said, where else should people look for new business? If you look at biology instead of for medicine, but look at biology for all sorts of other things, and look at biology for how I could generate foodstuffs, clean the air, and protect the lives of the astronauts. For example, we figured out how to look at our basic functions, and we could make radiation-resistant astronauts. We could make astronauts that are resistant to osteoporosis. If you're curious, I wrote a little paper on the 50th anniversary of the moon. Everyone wrote looking back, and I said, what's going to happen going forward? And there's a famous biologist at Harvard. He actually said these words, and he did it. I didn't make it up. But we're not doing these things. We're not exploiting biology to help our exploration. We're not exploiting biology. We could make materials out of biology. We could make foodstuffs. We're not doing it. So I believe if I were put in charge of it, I'd get us to Mars in 5 or 6 years. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I think, Von, actually, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I thought Von Braun overbuilt the Saturn V. Like, we didn't need something that powerful to get to the moon, but his eyes were always on Mars. And we did have a plan to go to Mars, but obviously we lost political coordination.
I'll push back.
Sure.
When you want to take on an impossible looking task, you want to over-design. That rocket had to be over-designed to make sure we could do it. And let me tell you, I was just on a little part of it. I was on the Pintle engine, which landed the astronauts on the moon. It was stressful. Sure, he had that vision, but if you want to do something fast, and I want to come back to what I said about Kelly Johnson. Kelly Johnson, in 4 years, and at the end of year 1, they said, well, we need a 90% less radar cross-section. He delivered that thing in 4 years. We can't deliver a new launch vehicle even in the commercial sector in that time frame. So here is a time in space when people understood how to do system engineering. They could do visualization in their head. America is forgetting what it takes to do clear thinking with one individual, not teams of people, not meetings, not, serving food. It comes from one human being. Elon Musk proved that. So I challenge everybody to think, how could you take the lead and do it different? And why in the world does it take so long and cost so much? It's ridiculous. Kelly Johnson did what he did. It was impossible. They're now working on the SR-72 for 20 years. It's unbelievable. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much.